Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast.
In this episode, I want to talk about something that is probably a hot button issue for some people today. It's something that people really love or hate. But it's also, I think, a bit more complex than the way that we tend to use the term today. And that is the topic of diversity. So just hang with me, whatever it is that your perspective is on this word, and I'm going to try to kind of empty your minds a little bit of some of the ways that we tend to commonly think and try to help you come to a different perspective maybe on diversity, or at least fill in the gaps a little bit. So diversity is probably something that you would not associate with simplicity, because diversity seems like something that is really complex. And in fact, a lot of times when you think of simplicity, you probably actually would associate something more like monotony, right? Which is kind of the opposite of diversity. Monotony seems more like something that is related to simplicity. Something that's the same tends to be simpler than things that are different. And the idea of monotony in our lives has negative connotations, right? Monotonous means the same thing as boring, basically. In general, I think a lot of people think of simplicity as monotony, and monotony as boring, and boring as something that we don't want. Therefore, simplicity is something that we don't want either. If diversity has to be more complex, if that's true, then is diversity really a bad thing, right? If I'm arguing for simplicity and now all of a sudden I'm talking about diversity and diversity being good, then how does that work? If I'm advocating simplicity, is diversity not antithetical to it? At the beginning of the season, I gave you a washing machine example, and we talked about how something like a washing machine seems like it's really simple, but actually it has a lot of working parts. It's got all kinds of springs and gears, circuitry, buttons. It's got all kinds of inputs and all kinds of electrical things. And if one of the parts goes wrong, probably your washing machine isn't going to function. When we think of nature, nature is kind of similar, but also very different, right? In some ways, nature is simpler. You need to go wash your clothes at the stream? Well, great. Right? You just wake up the next day and you go to the stream. You know that the stream is going to be there, and it's going to be there tomorrow and the next year and the next year after that. Right? I can go wash it in rain or shine. It doesn't matter. That's pretty simple, right? But nature also has a lot of working parts to it, right? Systems and biomes, symbiosis, all that stuff. Right? There's plate tectonics and landslides that can change the landforms over long periods of time. So even though I'm pretty sure that the stream's going to be there, there's still a lot that it depends on. It seems like it's kind of complex. So you can think of all kinds of things that could block the river or the stream that you wash your clothes in, or pollutants that could be added and change the composition of it. There's so many working pieces that go on in nature. It's just that nature tends to work well when it's left to itself for long periods of time. It doesn't tend to malfunction unless there's human intervention. So, nature is way more complex than a washing machine. In some ways, it's actually very simple, though, because it's very stable in general. And I think it's a difference between maybe synthetic and natural complexity, which we need to talk about. But before I unpack that, I want to make clear that I'm not going to be arguing that everything that is natural is good. So, for example, I know that when I was teaching chemistry in high school, I would point to the periodic table and just try to destroy this naturalistic fallacy, right? I'd point up there and I'd point specifically to arsenic, but you can point to a bunch of other items on the periodic table. And be like, look, these are some of the most natural things in the world. They're the building blocks of the universe. And that's what the periodic table represents. These substances make up everything. There's nothing more natural than these things, than something like arsenic. But you go and eat that arsenic, you're going to die pretty quickly. And it's not a great way to go. Certainly, arsenic is natural, but it's not good for you. So I'm not at all arguing that just because something is natural, it is necessarily good. But I do want to argue that in general, what is natural is going to tend towards the good. That is, if things are implemented in accordance with one's nature and the nature of the objects being used, then they tend to work. And to be clear, that goes back to our concept of eudaimonism in our propaganda season, which I think is one of the most foundational episodes and ideas that we can have in regard to understanding morality and faithfulness and functionality, the way that things work, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's really important for you to maybe go back and listen to that episode if you get some time. Generally, the best results are going to turn out by doing that, which is in line with the true nature of reality, of who you were meant to be and how nature was created. And that's not necessarily immediately, but definitely in the end. Of course, you can think of taking steroids and what that does to your muscles, right? That might work in the immediate term or pretty quickly, but in the long run, it's not going to end up being the best thing for you because it's not the way that your body is supposed to function. So in the long run, doing things in accordance with your nature is going to end up being the best thing. So when we talk about complexity or diversity, I'm going to argue that natural complexity or independent complexity, complexity left to adapt and to the way things work, that's what tends to be good. So in nature, you might take a look at things like biodiversity. Biodiversity tends to be really good. It helps the ecosystem to be healthy. There's a great documentary on this called The Biggest Little Farm, and just shows you a snippet, a small-scale example about these people who buy this area of land, and they try to figure out how to do things naturally in accordance with the ecosystem. And they discover the importance of actually having things like predators because it kills a certain type of population and a certain creature on the farm. But the importance of that creature to not go away completely because it also serves a function. Right? It's just this really cool small scale example of biodiversity and the way things are supposed to be. You can also look up, I think it's Yosemite or Yellowstone, and their example of the wolves, the reintroduction of wolves. You'd think that would be bad for the ecosystem, but because wolves kill creatures, but that biodiversity actually ended up being a really important part of helping Yellowstone to thrive. We all recognize this in nature, and I think it's very similar in the spiritual community too. Right? Think about the church. Right? Paul argues that we're a body of diverse parts. We all have different gifts, and we all contribute to the church in our own ways. We don't need to force people to be a monoculture. Paul says, I wish you could all prophesy and speak in tongues or whatever, but you all have different gifts, and it's okay. Right? If you all prophesied and desire to prophesy, that's great, but we all have different gifts and we edify the body differently because we're different body parts. And you can see this, but we also need these elements that aren't as flashy. So diversity is good, and it's kind of natural. Things tend to diversify, and it's important because if you try to synthetically simplify something, then you're probably going to end up having problems. I think if you look at Nathan Apfel's docuseries on the religion business, he talks a lot about our churches and how we've elevated a certain type of person and ideology. And we've got this showman or a business person. Charisma is really important there. Preaching is elevated in the diversity of the body. Diversity is not valued. And that's just not the way that nature, that humanity is supposed to be. And it makes sense that you have natural diversity, that not everybody's going to have the same personality or the same gifts. And to elevate one over the others just seems like it's problematic. We're not all going to have the same experiences, the same genetics, the same skills. So there's got to be a sense in which people bring a lot of different skills and ideas and experiences to the table. And that's a really good thing, to not create this synthetic sort of environment. And part of that, it's not just spiritual either, and it's not just part of nature. It's also something that we could look at, which is where most people's minds go when you think of diversity, and that's also racial diversity, especially in our culture. I mean, I could see a long time ago, depending on what part of the world you were living in, I could understand how you might expect your church not to look really diverse because people were just kind of stuck in their local places for most of history. If you traveled more than like 40 miles away from your house, then you had traveled farther than the vast majority of people in all of history. A lot of people just they weren't able to travel very far because transportation was hard and dangerous. So you were going to live around people that were very similar to you. But today, that's very different, especially in certain countries. Right? The United States is definitely a country where we have a lot of diversity, and so you'd expect to see diversity just as a natural aspect of where you have so many people, different people living near each other. If there's not a lot of diversity, then there's probably some injustice in the system or somewhere else, right, being enacted. Whether that goes back to past injustices, legislative injustices, things like redlining or whatever, or whether it's just moral injustice on the part of people. People keeping from other races out, not incorporating them into their worship styles or their skill sets, their experiences. It's just absolutely unnatural to not be diverse in our culture, at least. It's synthetic. When you have a monoculture of people, and when you have all white churches and all black churches, I mean, that's synthetic. That's unnatural. You look at the way that kids treat people who are often of a different race when they're young, and a lot of times they don't even notice. So I had some of my kids at some point ask some questions about like color and stuff, but by and large, they were just interested. And by and large, they didn't really even notice. I remember our youngest daughter, we got her a black Barbie, and she didn't even say anything about it. It was just another Barbie, right? Prejudice is something that is taught in or experienced, observed by children. It's not something that's natural to them. Like, it's not a natural part of who we are to start with. Seeking to avoid diversity has to be something that's trained in. So I'm going to argue that overall, this natural diversity is, I think, a good thing. I think most people recognize that overall it is a good thing. And so there are a lot of people, even people who might be naysayers about diversity as it stands in our culture today, who kind of try to embrace it to a certain extent. I think this is particularly true in the area of food. A lot of people want to try lots of different foods and have lots of different foods available to them. And so we like the idea of diversity in regard to foods and products. Just go look at the store shelves and you'll see diversity galore. But a lot of times this is like a synthetic diversity. Think about the movie, I think it was The Botany of Desire, where he talked about just the thousands of different varieties of apple trees, and a lot of those have gone by the wayside. They've kind of, I don't know, they might not even exist anymore, a lot of them, because they haven't been cultivated. Because what people have done in the modern era is we've kind of taken this diversity and we've squeezed whatever we can out of all the trees that we find useful, breeding them for whatever sweetness and taste or durability, hardiness, whatever it is that we desire. And we've taken a lot of fruits and vegetables and we've put them into monocultures or something close to that, where now we've just got way less varieties than we used to have. And so we have lots of different types of products when we go to the grocery store, but a lot of times they're really whittled down sorts of products. And that makes them more susceptible to diseases and some big problems like pests. If one pest runs through the monoculture of the potato crop, we're in trouble because we really only have like one type of potato by and large that we're cultivating. So we like the idea of diversity, but we really struggle to implement that kind of thing. So the problem is that it's not really natural diversity, because diversity is incorporating all of the different aspects together in unity. And we don't have that with monocultures. What we have ends up not being unity, but conformity. So unity is togetherness and presence, whereas conformity is more akin to mimicry and sameness. Teams have uniforms, but teams aren't uniform. I think the Romanian language helps a little bit with this, because when you think of the word team, the word is echipa. Well, it's the same word, like if you say, I am equipped, you'd say, am echipat, right? I am equipped. So I'm on a team, and a team is equipped, and I help to equip the team. It's equipped to accomplish a task together, to overcome adversity, to defeat an opponent. As individuals who are united together for the same cause, towards the same end, but they appear uniformed as one in appearance. In terms of their this parallel with individual positions and functions on a team, they're going to be very different. A goalie is going to be able to use their hands where nobody else can. Defenders typically aren't going to go too far beyond midfield in soccer, and the forwards, strikers, are not going to go into their own 18-yard line most of the time. But groups like cults, which institutional churches tend to be a lot of times today, tend to see the former, right, this idea of conformity, they see that as really what unity is supposed to be. It's what they foster. They call conformity unity. And then they call that conformity diversity, right? Look at all the diverse people we have coming into our church. You look at all this diversity. But really what they end up doing is, instead of being diverse and allowing individuals to be their own selves within the church, they dogmatically conform them to a very specific look or set of actions and beliefs. I mean, I just saw a clip from somebody in a pastor, I believe he's in the Doug Wilson crowd, who was saying something very similar, right? He was saying, if we had a black person come to us, would we accept him into our membership? And you're just waiting, you're like, oh no, what's he going to say? He's like, yes, of course we would. I'm like, oh, okay. But then he goes on. He's like, but we would not conform to his evil, whatever, his culture. And why wouldn't he accept his culture? Because this guy said that his culture is violence and rape and all this other stuff, of course. So what he's saying is, we want diversity, but we don't want unity in diversity. What we really want is that black person to come in and to conform, right? To conform to my definition of his culture, to repudiate my definition of his culture, and to not accept his culture. He needs to accept our culture. Now, of course, the pastor would say that that's because his definition is God's definition, of course. And that goes back to our discussion on inerrancy and stuff. But the way that he talks about his brothers, right, and is like his brother in Christ, the way that he treats his black brother, just by the way that he talks about him, is horrendous. But conformity is easier for abusers and power mongers to implement, because you can do it by controlling, implementing violence and information and charisma. You can make sure somebody conforms, and if they don't, there are consequences for them. You can scare people into compliance. You can isolate them or bribe them. It's more challenging to have something like unity, because unity is natural and independent. It's not synthetic. It comes as a result of individuals making uncoerced, unfettered choices. Choosing as individuals in unity, people retain their skill sets and identities and their cultures, but they work together and join themselves as part of a team who will equip each other and will help each other towards a common goal. Conformity isn't only bad for you, but it's bad and it's wrong, and it produces bad results. It's also problematic because for the people who want to implement it, they're going to find that they're going to be out of control eventually. Conformity is problematic because the larger the group, the more challenging it is to ensure compliance. I mean, just think of this from a national standpoint right now. Why is the pushback so hard against immigration? Why do people want everyone to speak the same language? Right? Because they know that they need conformity. And today, our culture is very divided. And so conformity is more important than ever because people recognize that things are falling apart. There's not unity, but what the powerful want is not unity. They want the appearance of unity, which is conformity. They want people to sit idly by and be fleeced and be taken advantage of, which requires conformity. Right? Unity is something different. Unity is individuals being the individuals, and maintaining that and maintaining their will. But in this culture, that in a nation that seeks conformity, you need people to all be the same and seek the same thing. You can't have too many dissenters burning flags or who don't speak the same language. Conformity is vital to the maintenance of a community that you can control. You can just think of North Korea, right? Or you could think of, I always forget if it's Vaclav Havel or Alexander Solzhenitsyn, but their discussion of the greengrocer. Under communism, you'd have to put out a sign that said, "Workers of the world unite." And you got in really big trouble if you didn't put out that sign. Why? It's just a sign. Well, because your conformity was what they desired. So what about the slogan? You had to show that you fell in line with the Communist Party. You had to show that you conformed. Because if people thought for themselves, if people started to dissent in any way, then the party felt threatened. So you have to conform. And of course, in democracies in the U.S., we still require conformity. It just looks a little bit different. The ramifications of that and the way that we expect conformity. I think the same thing that our nation recognizes is what that pastor I referenced just a little bit ago recognized with black people coming into his church. They are a threat because there would not be conformity. Right? Racial integration at his church was a threat. And so he can't allow that unless those people would be willing to conform. That's part of the reason why you find very few white people in primarily black churches and very few black people in primarily white churches, which is why, like Martin Luther King Jr., I think, said, Sundays at 10 a.m. is the most segregated day of the week. Because churches, a lot of times, are about conformity, not unity. You talk about love for diversity, but we all go our separate ways on Sunday morning, where we get to choose what we love. When you go to work, you don't really get to choose that. You have to go to work. When you on Sundays, you get to choose where you spend your time. And if you go to church, you're choosing to go to a place that is way more segregated than your workplace, most of us, to your all-white or all-black church. Now, I think a lot of churches are less like that, that pastor who explicitly is against essentially integration. I think more churches would be so implicitly, where it's Well, of course they want people of a different race to come. But what they don't want, right, so they're not going to do things to purposefully keep people out. They're not that aggressive. But they're not really willing to change. Everybody, the white people want their own music the way that they've always had it. And they want their programs and their emphases the way that they want them. They don't want to do anything to foster diversity, to recognize other cultures, to make a way for them, to allow individuals to remain individuals, but to unite with those individuals. We don't really want to do that. It's uncomfortable and it's inconvenient. And even beyond that, those individuals, maybe somebody who comes in from a certain community, would have a heart for urban ministry or something like a food pantry. Well, now all of a sudden that's really inconvenient because I'm going to have to go spend time with people who are poor, maybe some homeless people, maybe people who have smells I don't like. Maybe I'm going to have to leave my gated community and feel a little bit uncomfortable going into other parts of the community. There are lots of reasons I don't want the light shined on that aspect of the kingdom, of the world that I'm missing out on. That aspect of the world that maybe I'm contributing to keeping that way through the place that I work or through the financial decisions that I make. Diversity brings us close to people with different experiences who can point out things to us that we might not want pointed out. And so unity, diversity is threatening. And a lot of times we inadvertently, though conveniently, set up our churches and our systems and our institutions in ways that prevent us from having to deal with that discomfort, from having to come face to face with that discomfort. So certainly, I don't want to deny that there's a lot of this lack of diversity, which comes from more innocent places, right? Places where people aren't as explicit as this pastor who is trying to basically call black people degenerates and say that they had to all conform. And most people don't really think that way, but we act that way. We act in ways that we're unwilling to make sacrifices and reach out for diversity. But certainly there are a lot of people who also are drawn towards that more overt shutdown of diversity because they want conformity. And a lot of those people are just like if we talked about in our propaganda season. They've got these characteristics of abusers. A lot of church leaders have characteristics of abusers. These abusive tendencies to isolate, to manipulate, to control the narrative, all of those things. And diversity would be a threat to that conformity that maintains the abuser's power. These abusers propagandize, and propaganda is a huge aspect to how they can maintain power. And conversely, diversity is really important to being able to see truth and break free from propaganda. As what I think is a great example of this, I had a friend recently talking to me, and he's just so confused about the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Gaza conflict, because there are people that he trusts and respects on both sides of the issue, and I think there genuinely are. There are people who are so deceived, and sometimes it's hard not to think that some of this is self-deception, but there's a lot of just misinformation and propaganda out there, especially with AI. 2 years ago, when the Gaza conflict started, you could largely trust what you saw in a lot of videos, but man, just in the last couple of months, it's hard to know whether you can believe a video or not a lot of times because AI has gotten so good. So it makes sense that it's hard to believe things. It's hard to understand things. And so you kind of have to pick a side, and people are just very deceived. So how do you know truth? My answer to him was diversity. Diversity is a huge way that I have a stronger confidence in truth. So thinking of Israel and Gaza, like I could see videos from the ground in Gaza, from Palestinian press, from some churches that were there, from Christians posting videos, from humanitarian aid workers posting. Like I could see lots of videos, so I saw it with my own eyes. But then you had people from like all different walks of life who are talking about this. You've got Christians in Gaza who are there, or Palestinians in the West Bank. You've got Christians who are saying, "Guys, you're killing fellow Christians, and you're killing, like, I mean, that's not even the most important thing. You're killing innocent people." But the point of saying that they're Christians is to say that you're even choosing to kill your brothers. Like, you'd even kill your own family on top of just killing civilians and innocent people in general. Like, how can you do this? Like, stop it. So Christians, you'd have David Banura, I'm not sure how to say his name, from Across the Divide podcast, has people from all over evangelicalism, Judaism, Islam. Like, he's got guests on his podcast all the time. And so hearing from people of different faiths, including Judaism, like Jews who are against Israel, lots of them, tons of them, right? Jewish Voices for Peace, all kinds of people who are against Israel and speaking out for what's going on in Gaza to help them. You've got, you've got ex-military who've gone over and tried to help with the aid distribution, and who are like, man, I did not know what I was going to see when I got there, but when I got there, this is what's happening. They're killing Christians. They're killing Muslims. They're killing children. They're killing civilians. Like, it's indiscriminate. They're just killing people. You had humanitarian aid workers from around the world. You have nations from around the world. Almost like the vast majority of nations are recognizing that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. So South Africa in particular, who knows what apartheid and everything looks like, and they're speaking out against the genocide. So, like, that to me, that diversity of voices is extremely helpful in my understanding of where truth lies in this matter. And on top of all of that diversity of voices, you've also got people coming out from the Israeli military, right? This is enemy attestation, which is really big for Christian apologetics who want to point to the resurrection of Jesus, right? Enemy attestation. What do you have coming out of Israel? Well, just in the last couple of days, there was a general in Israel released a video of Palestinians, men being raped by Israeli guards, and you have some defectors from the Israeli military who are talking about the things that they did. Some of them like, man, I can't believe I did this. This is terrible. But a lot of them just being like, man, what happened was horrible. I'm going through PTSD. This is bad. And less like remorse and more of just like, man, somebody had to do the job. I just wish it wasn't me. But saying the things that they did over there, the horrible, horrible things that they were doing. I mean, you've just got a plethora of voices coming out about what's going on in Gaza. On the other hand, you have the voices that you have defending Israel are people who have something in common, right? They're a monoculture. And they appear diverse on the surface, right? You've got some South American countries, you've got some European countries, and you've got the United States, who are and the people in the United States who are defending it are largely politicians, and the South American countries who are defending it pretty much are like basically dogs on a leash to the United States. They know what happens if you don't play nice with the United States. You're going to have a coup against you, Venezuela, or you're going to, well, not Venezuela yet, but I guess this is predictive. Or you're going to have money cut to you, like you better play the way the U.S. wants you to play. You can go back and listen to our episode on Haiti and our propaganda season for a deep, deep dive into just one small portion of history and the globe. But you have all these people with vested interests, politicians. They all 80+% of them get contributions from AIPAC, right? You look at the people who are defending Israel, and they're a monoculture. They've got a vested interest. And Dan Carlin said very correctly, I think, that you don't need conspiracy theory when interests converge. And all those who are defending Israel have their interests converging. All those, or I shouldn't say all those, but the huge diversity of voices speaking out against Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, they don't have an interest in each other. And in fact, there's a lot going against them. There's political pressure against them. There's, being called anti-Semitic, whatever. They've got all of these reasons not to speak out against Gaza, the Gaza genocide. Yet they do. They don't gain anything from it, most people. So that, to me, like, diversity shows me what truth is. It helps me to uncover what truth is. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that we are averse to diversity. I'm thinking specifically of the church here. As a nation, I get why we're against diversity. But as a church, we don't want more diversity because a lot of times that diversity of voices is going to uncover some truths that are really inconvenient to us. So diversity is important for our church to function. It's important for our world to function. Yes, I am an individual in that I function as an individual, but I also need other individuals, different individuals, acting differently than me as their own individuals, not all of us being conformed to one monoculture. I need to unite together to make a community so that I can be who I was meant to be through them edifying me and through me being able to use my skills. Just as there needs to be other people who are acting as individuals seeking to edify me. So I need diverse people in my life to shine light into areas that I can't see or don't want to see, and so that I can better know what truth is. And I know that we're all the same in that way. Right? I know you're just like me, and you need diversity as well. It's a complex issue. It's a complex thing, but it's also a really, really simple one. And it's one that functions the way that God intended it to. We don't need to foster a monoculture of conformity. We need to look for diversity and unity.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.